Welcome back, everybody. Let's take a look into the third installment of the Civil War review. This one pertains to the Civil War itself, which lasted from 1861 to 1865. Vocabulary that's important for us. Confederacy is actually a repeat. Confederacy, or the Confederate States of America, that has certainly a role today. In today's lesson, border states during the Civil War. This is one of those states that stayed with the Union even though it was a slave state. The 54th Massachusetts, or the 54th, we'll hear a little bit about that shortly. In the Emancipation Proclamation, this is a decree by President Lincoln that declared all enslaved people will be free. However, pay attention to the definition. This is in regards to slaves in the Confederate States. So keep that in mind when you are reviewing the Emancipation Proclamation. We end with the 13th Amendment, and this is what abolishes all slavery in the United States. Fort Sumter has an important role at the start of the war. So let's do a little bit of review and then dive into how Fort Sumter is important during this time period. In 1860, Lincoln is elected. And keep in mind, the South is nervous that his election means the end of slavery in the United States. They feel he's just going to go ahead and ban it. Okay, so they begin secession, and that starts in late 1860 with South Carolina, which throughout history, specifically the 1830s on, has really been maybe the most ardent supporter of slavery. This state secedes, and then you get a number of other states that secede, or they leave the Union. They leave the United States and create their own country, the Confederacy. So then the Confederacy names a president, and Jefferson Davis becomes the first president of the Confederacy. He's put in as like a temporary president until they can elect one. And when that time comes, they do elect Jefferson Davis as their president. When Jefferson Davis becomes president, shortly after, you get the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln is elected in 1860, but he will not take office until 1861. That is in March. If March looks out of sorts as an inauguration date, you aren't necessarily wrong if you compare it to inauguration of presidents today. Today, they are inaugurated in January, but keep in mind the limitations of transportation, the movement of the speed at which news moves, all these things that are 150 years ago. They have a role in Lincoln's inauguration taking place at a later date compared to today. But he becomes president in 1861. Then you get Fort Sumter. Okay, so he's inaugurated, he's president in 1861, and then we shift our focus to Fort Sumter and where it is. So secession has occurred. Another country has been created by these southern states. Abraham Lincoln is in office, and Fort Sumter is located in the waters of Charleston, South Carolina. South Carolina is now a Confederate state, but this is a Union fort, if you will. It's a federal fort. It stayed with the Union, but it has not been seized by the South. There were many forts that were federal forts remaining loyal to the Union that were seized or overtaken, but this one had not been seized by the Confederacy yet. So since they had not been seized, and since Fort Sumter was a Union fort, if you will, they are kind of trapped, or those inside the fort are trapped, and they are running low on supplies. So those in Fort Sumter need supplies. And Lincoln, even though the South said, do not do this, otherwise we will consider it an act of aggression, Lincoln decides to send supplies to the fort. That is a big deal. Because Lincoln sends supplies, the South will fire the first shots of the Civil War. And that's it. The Civil War has begun. So the importance of this is, why is it really? We're looking at why is this important that the South fires the first shots. Okay? And really, there's nothing that stated secession was illegal. Abraham Lincoln considered it illegal or that it cannot be done, but there's really nothing that says it can't be done. And the world, in some ways, are watching, because specifically Europe is watching, because not too long ago, there was a revolution that created the United States, saying that, the lack of freedom. And here are a bunch of individuals in states saying, well, our freedoms are being denied. We want to become our own nation. What's wrong with that? So did the Union even have a right to begin a war with the seceded states? In the end, that didn't matter, because the Union did not start the war with the Confederacy. Rather, the Confederacy started the war with the Union. All right, the Civil War and some of the key moments. There are a lot, and there are some left out, but these are some that certainly pertain to what we look at while we look at the Reconstruction, which is where we move to after this part of the unit. The original aim of Lincoln is not about slavery. That is what the South believed. They believed that slavery were to be abolished under a United States led by Lincoln. However, it was all about the war is all about restoring the Union. It is not a war to end slavery. That's where in 1861 the aim of Lincoln is. The North versus the South, there's a couple of important things to keep in mind. One is population. In the South, there are fewer people, period, which means when it comes to the number of soldiers, the North certainly has an advantage. The North also has an advantage in its industry. It is an industrialized part of the nation. What does that mean? That means things such as industrial products, such as guns, and really important, railroads. Those are serious or main fixtures. The railroad specifically is a main fixture in the North. There are railroads in the South, but there are many more in the North, and that makes transporting soldiers easier during a time of war. Additionally, on top of this, most of the war is fought in the South. And that means after the war, there's cleanup to do. The South needs to be restored, and the North will seek to help the North out with this. Help the South out with this, excuse me. The Emancipation Proclamation, it's one of those vocab words, oh so important, but Lincoln notified the South in 1862, giving them a little bit of time to think about it. He notified the South that he will be freeing all the slaves in the Confederacy by the start of 1863. But they could keep their slaves in slavery if they re-entered into the Union. Okay, so that was the Emancipation Proclamation that in 1863, boom, all slaves were freed in the Confederacy. However, what does that really mean for what truly did happen? They're technically freed if you consider kind of the South still part of the Union, but the South doesn't really consider Abraham Lincoln to be anything to them, and really no slaves are freed at this time. That will happen only another day. Black soldiers, free blacks, wanted to fight, and they do fight. Okay. Many whites wondered if they could make good soldiers, but the 54th Massachusetts exemplified the type of bravery that they had. The 54th Massachusetts is probably the most famous regiment, black regiment in the Union Army. And essentially, they caught white soldiers, white citizens that learned of their bravery. They caught them off guard by how brave they exactly were. Of course, that bravery, as we find out, the bravery that the 54th has leads to much of the regiment being killed in battle. Okay, about half of the regiment is killed. Habeas corpus, this happens very early in the war. Habeas corpus is suspended by Lincoln. Now, habeas corpus protects people from being held in jail without being charged with a specific crime. That means somebody with the power can go ahead and just arrest individuals for no reason whatsoever. This certainly is not upheld by our Constitution, but in times of war, habeas corpus can be exercised. And that's exactly what Abraham Lincoln does. He is arresting individuals that are suspected of disloyalty to the Union. Finally, we get to the 13th Amendment. This is happening after the war, and that amendment is what abolishes slavery in the United States. The 13th Amendment is removing slavery from all states, North and South. All right, let's return back to the 54th Massachusetts. This black regiment is known for their bravery, but a lot of the white population wondered if a black person would make a good soldier. Now, think about that question. There's a problem with this. What is the underlying problem that exists with that question? All right, the problem is the question is rooted in racism. It's bias. Whites question whether a person's skin color would inhibit them from being brave. Could they not? Could black people not be good soldiers because they were black? That question is rooted in racism. It's a presumption made by many at the time. Whites questioned whether blacks could fight because they most often considered them subpar to whites. Of course, skin color does not determine who makes a good soldier. That is why that question is rooted in racist thinking, is because the question is about whether or not a person of a certain skin color could be good at something because of their skin color. Finally, the war comes to an end in 1865 at the Appomattox Courthouse, where General Lee from the South surrenders to General Grant. And in 1865, the war is done. Couple of conclusions to make note of. Fort Sumter, key moment, which we discussed at length. So Fort Sumter, the South starts the war. Then on the back end here, shift of war aims. If you didn't catch this, it's there for you to see, but I didn't make mention of it. We start by saying Abraham Lincoln's aims were not about the war and eliminating slavery, or the Civil War for Abraham Lincoln was not about getting rid of slavery. It was about keeping the Union together. However, we see with time that Abraham Lincoln thinks, at least, that it is a must where he needs to take action regarding the existence of slavery. That's where we see the introduction of the Emancipation Proclamation and eventually the 13th Amendment. There is a new aim that has to do with ending slavery. It was there for us to see, and here we make note of it. That brings us to the end of the Civil War review. This is stuff we all got from 8th grade, our last year in middle school, but we're using this to set up where we head next in history, and that is Reconstruction, a very tough period of time. In any case, that's it today. We'll see you next time.